Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everyday Real English from Real Life podcast.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Annie.
And I'm Brendy.
And we're really glad you're joining us today. We're tackling something that, well, touches pretty much everyone's life.
Yeah, unless you're maybe a prince or, I don't know, a preschooler. Money stress is kind of universal, isn't it?
It really can be. So today, we're diving into budgeting for rent.
And our goal here is simple, really. We want to help you, our English learning listeners, understand the key words and some practical tips for renting.
Right. So you feel more confident when you're talking about money and housing, maybe looking for an apartment. We're aiming to make some sometimes complex ideas clear and, useful for everyday life.
Exactly. We'll cover some essential English terms, look at smart ways to budget, and even do a quick role play to hear it in action.
Okay, sounds like a plan. So before we get into the actual numbers, like how much rent, let's make sure we're all speaking the same language when it comes to money.
Good idea. Where should we start?
How about with the word budget?
Perfect. Budget, pronounced B-U-H-jet. Now, I know for some people that word makes them groan a little bit.
Yeah, it can sound a bit restrictive.
Right. But try thinking of it differently. It's not really a straitjacket for your spending. It's more like your financial battle plan.
A battle plan, I like that.
Yeah. You're basically giving every dollar you have a specific job to do. You're telling your money where to go.
So you're in charge, like the commander-in-chief of your finances.
Exactly. And the key thing about effective budgets, they work with the money you actually have right now. Not what you wish you had, but what's really there.
Okay, that makes sense. So you might say something like, creating a budget helps me decide how much money I can spend this month.
Precisely. And the why behind it is important too. It's about gaining clarity, getting control, and honestly, that usually leads to less stress, maybe even more happiness with the money you've got.
Less stress is always good. Okay, so if budgeting is the plan, you need to know what money you're planning with. Let's talk income. Income.
Right, income. And there are two main types you'll hear about.
Yep. First is gross income. That's G-R-O-S-S, gross, pronounced G-R-H-S, income. This is basically all the money you earn before anything is taken out, like taxes or deductions.
So it's the bigger number you might see on, say, an offer letter or the top of your pay stub.
Exactly. Then there's net income, net income. This is what most people call their take-home pay.
Ah, the important one.
Yeah. It's the actual amount of money that ends up in your bank account after taxes and all those other deductions have been taken out.
So just as an example, your gross income might be, let's say, $4,000 a month.
Right. But your net income, what you actually get to use, might be more like $3,200.
Okay. And knowing that net income figure is, well, it's crucial, isn't it, for making a realistic budget?
Absolutely. You budget based on what you actually have.
Okay, so you know your net income.
Wow.
What's next when you're planning? You need to figure out your essentials, pronounced essentials.
Essentials, things you absolutely need, right?
That's it. The things you really cannot do without. These are your most urgent financial priorities.
Like what sort of things fall into essentials?
Well, the big ones are usually rent, definitely. Then utilities, electricity, water, groceries. For food, if you need a car for work, then car payments and insurance might be essential. Health insurance, too.
So the basic costs of living and working.
Pretty much. Things you need to live or, do your job effectively. You might say, rent, utilities, and groceries are my main essentials.
Got it. Knowing those helps you make sure the most important things are covered first in your budget.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have budget, income, gross and net, and essentials. Now, how do we connect these to the big question? How much rent can you actually afford?
Ah, yes. The million-dollar question, sometimes literally. It's often the biggest single expense people have.
So are there any rules of thumb, guidelines?
There are. One you hear a lot is the 30% rule.
The 30% rule. Okay, what's that?
The general idea is to try and spend about 30% of your gross income on your rent.
Gross income, so the before tax number.
Yes, that's the traditional way this rule is stated. So let's use that $4,000 gross income example again.
Okay.
If you earn $4,000 gross per month, 30% of that is $1,200. So this rule suggests you'd aim for rent around or below $1,200.
$1,200. But, and this is important, you said it's a guideline, not a strict rule.
Absolutely crucial point. It's just a starting point for thinking. Because honestly, whether 30% is realistic really depends on where you live and your other expenses.
Right. Like if you live in a super expensive city, maybe New York, San Francisco, finding a decent place for under $1,200 might be, well, impossible. Median rents there can be way over $3,000 for just a one-bedroom.
Exactly. In places like that, people often have to spend much more than 30% of their gross income on rent. It's just the reality of the market.
And on the flip side, if you live somewhere much more affordable, maybe you can find a great place for, say, only 20% of your income.
Which is fantastic. It frees up money for other things. So yeah, the 30% rule is a benchmark, not a law.
Yeah.
You have to consider your specific situation.
Okay, so that's one approach, using gross income. Is there another way to think about it?
There is. Another popular guideline uses your net income, that take-home pay we talked about. It's called the 50-30-20 budget rule.
50-30-20. I think I've heard of this one. How does it work?
It's pretty straightforward. You divide your net income into 3 buckets. 50% goes towards your needs.
Needs. So that includes rent
Right.
and other essentials.
Exactly. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, transportation, minimum debt payments, all those essentials we defined earlier. They should ideally fit within that 50%.
Okay, what about the other half?
Then 30% is allocated for wants.
Wants. Like going out to eat, entertainment, shopping for clothes that aren't strictly necessary.
Yep. Things that make life enjoyable but aren't survival needs. And finally, the last 20% is for savings and paying off debt beyond the minimums.
So saving for goals, building an emergency fund, maybe paying extra on student loans or credit cards.
Precisely. It gives a balanced approach to covering today's needs, enjoying life a bit, and planning for the future.
Let's try that with our example. Net income of, say, $3,200 this time. No, wait, let's stick with $4,000 net income to make the math easier for comparison.
Okay, $4,000 net income per month. 50% for needs would be $2,000.
Right. So $2,000 has to cover all your essentials. Rent, utilities, food, insurance, car payments, student loan minimums, everything.
And this is where it gets interesting. Let's say your other essentials, maybe groceries are $400, car payment and insurance are $400, student loan minimum is $200, health insurance is $120. That's $1,120 already.
Wow, okay. So out of the $2,000 allocated for needs, you've already spent over half before even considering rent or utilities.
Exactly. That leaves you with only $880 for rent and utilities combined in this specific example.
$880, that suddenly makes finding a place seem much tighter, especially when you mention average rents can be much higher, like over $1,700 nationwide.
It really highlights how other essential costs dramatically impact what's realistically looked for housing, even within that 50% needs category. Sometimes, especially if you're, say, moving for a job or have unexpected costs, your needs might go over 50%.
What do you do then?
Well, some people use a variation, like a 60-30-10 budget, allowing 60% for needs, which gives a bit more breathing room there, but obviously reduces what goes to wants or savings. It's about finding the balance that works for you.
Okay, this is helpful. It shows there's more to the rent calculation than just the sticker price. Which brings us to other costs. Because the monthly rent isn't the only thing you pay, right?
Not at all. Here's where it gets, as you said, really interesting. Let's talk about those other costs and then, crucially, some ways you might be able to save money.
Yes. Savings tips are always welcome. First, let's clarify utilities. We mentioned them as essentials, but let's define them.
Sure, utilities. Pronounced utilities. These are basically the services you need to make your home function. Think electricity, water, natural gas for heating or cooking, sometimes trash removal or sewage.
The basics that keep things running.
Exactly. And the super important question to ask when you're looking at renting a place is, are utilities included?
Ah, yes, because sometimes the rent price includes some or all utilities, and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. You might see an apartment listed for $1,500, but if you have to pay an extra $150 or $200 a month for electricity, gas, and water, your actual housing cost is much higher.
So always ask, are utilities included or are they separate? That can make a big difference in your budget.
Definitely. When I was looking for my last apartment, that was always one of my first questions.
Makes sense. Now, you mentioned saving money, even as a renter. Can you actually control utility costs?
You absolutely can. It's a common misconception that renters have no control. You might not own the building, but you often pay the bills, and you can definitely influence how much energy and water you use.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of things can renters do?
Well, let's start with something simple. Light bulbs. Switch out any old incandescent bulbs for LEDs.
LED bulbs. They're more energy efficient, right?
Massively. They use up to 75% less energy and last way longer. Yes, they cost a bit more up front, but the electricity savings add up quickly. Plus, they don't get as hot. And the best part,
What's that?
You can usually just unscrew them and take them with you when you move.
Oh, that's clever. Okay, what else?
Manage your thermostat wisely. Even adjusting it by a few degrees, maybe a bit lower in winter when you can wear a sweater, or a bit higher in summer when you can use a fan, makes a real difference on your heating and cooling bills. Those are usually the biggest energy users.
Small changes, big impact potentially.
Exactly.
Another
one, check for drafts. Feel around your windows and doors. If you feel cold air coming in during winter or warm air in summer, your heating or AC is literally escaping.
Like throwing money out the window.
Pretty much. Simple things like weather stripping tape or putting a draft stopper at the bottom of a door are cheap fixes that can save a surprising amount. You can often find these easily online or at hardware stores.
Good practical tip. Any others?
Yes, unplug electronics when you're not using them. Or use power strips that you can switch off.
Why unplug them? If they're off, right?
Not always. Many modern electronics have what's called phantom load or vampire power. They keep drawing a small amount of electricity even when turned off, just to be ready for a remote control or to maintain settings.
Really? Like TVs and chargers?
Yep. TVs, game consoles, computers, phone chargers left plugged in, coffee makers.
Yeah.
It all adds up. Some studies suggest this phantom load can account for up to 10% of your household electricity use.
Wow, 10% is significant. Just from things being plugged in but off.
It can be, so unplugging or using those switchable power strips really helps cut waste.
Okay, those are great tips for managing your usage. Is there anything you can do involving the landlord?
Sometimes, yes. It's always worth a conversation, especially if you notice things are really inefficient, like maybe very old appliances or single-pane windows.
What would you say?
You could approach your landlord and suggest energy-efficient upgrades. Frame it as a win-win. You explain that upgrading, say, the refrigerator or adding better insulation could lower your utility bills, making you a happier tenant.
And for the landlord?
For the landlord, it increases the value and attractiveness of their property. They might be willing to invest, or maybe even split the cost of certain upgrades, especially if they know it saves money and makes the property better long-term.
Can't hurt to ask politely.
True. Good advice. Okay, moving on from utilities, there's another term that often comes up when renting. Credit score.
Ah, yes, the credit score. This is basically a number, usually between 300 and 850, that summarizes your history of borrowing and repaying money.
So it tells lenders and landlords how responsible you seem to be with managing debt.
In a nutshell, yes. Think of it like a financial reputation score. Landlords use it to help them decide if you're likely to pay your rent reliably and on time.
So a better credit score can make it easier to get approved for an apartment you want.
Definitely. A good credit score can be a big advantage, especially in competitive rental markets. Landlords see it as lower risk.
And how do you get a good score? The usual advice is paying bills on time, especially credit cards, right? That's the main driver, yes. Paying all your bills, including credit cards and loans, consistently on time is huge. But here's something renters might not realize.
What's that?
Paying your rent on time can also potentially help your credit score.
How does that work? I thought rent payments weren't usually reported.
Traditionally, they weren't.
Yeah.
But it's changing. There are now services that allow landlords or property managers to report your on-time rent payments to the major credit bureaus, like Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax.
Oh, interesting. So it's worth asking a potential landlord if they use such a service.
Absolutely. If they do, it means your responsible habit of paying rent every month can actively build your positive credit history, which is great for your financial future beyond just renting.
That's a really valuable tip for renters.
Okay, we've covered a lot of terms and ideas. How about we put some of this into action? Let's listen to a short conversation, the kind you might actually have when you're inquiring about renting a place.
Good idea. But first, let's quickly touch on a pronunciation point you often hear in natural spoken English. Think about the phrase rent a house.
Rent a house.
When native speakers say this quickly, the tes sound at the end of rent often blends into the a sound that follows it. Sometimes it almost disappears. So renta can sound like rana.
House. It makes the speech flow more smoothly.
Exactly. It's very common. Also, think about intonation. If you're asking a yes-no question like, you rent a house, your voice usually goes up a bit and then down at the end. Listen, you rent a house.
Up and then down.
Right. But if you're making a statement like, we rent a house, the intonation tends to be flatter, maybe rising slightly and then falling at the very end. We rent a house.
Statement intonation. Got it.
Just little things that help with understanding and sounding more natural. Okay, let's try that role play. I'll be the person looking to rent, and you can be the landlord or the agent showing the apartment.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Hello, I saw the listing online, and I'm interested in renting this apartment. Could you tell me what's the monthly rent?
Hi there. Yes, certainly. The monthly rent for this unit is $1,500.
Okay, $1,500. And a really important question for my budget. Are utilities included in that price?
That's a great question to ask. In this unit, water is included in the rent.
Just water. So electricity and gas, those would be separate.
That's correct. You would need to set up accounts with the local providers for electricity and gas yourself and pay those bills separately.
I see. Good to know. And are there any other significant upfront costs I should be aware of before signing a lease? Like a security deposit?
Yes, there is a security deposit required. It's equal to 1 month's rent, so that would be $1,500. That deposit is due when you sign the lease agreement.
Okay, so $1,500 for the deposit plus the first month's rent due at signing. Thanks for clarifying. I'm working carefully on my budget, so it's really helpful to understand all the expenses involved.
Absolutely. It's very smart to get a clear picture of the total costs. Understanding your full financial commitment up front is definitely key to good budgeting.
Okay, that dialogue gave us a good feel for how those terms might be used.
Yeah, hopefully hearing it helps solidify things. So just to do a quick recap of what we covered in this deep dive.
Good idea.
We talked about some key vocabulary. Budget, understanding your income, both gross and net, identifying your essentials, what utilities are, and the importance of your credit score.
And we looked at some practical ways to figure out rent affordability, like the 30% rule as a guideline, or using the 40-30-20 budget based on your net income, plus those really useful tips to save on utilities.
Right. Things like switching to LED bulbs, managing that thermostat, ceiling drafts, and even unplugging those sneaky phantom power devices.
Little things that can add up.
They really can. And by learning these terms and strategies, you've honestly taken a big step towards feeling more confident, understanding, and, importantly, talking about budgeting for rent in English.
Absolutely. Keep practicing these words and thinking about these ideas. Apply them to your own situation.
And remember that final thought we touched on earlier. The real point of budgeting, like a lot of good financial habits, isn't just about having more money.
Right. It's often more about being happier and less stressed with the money you do have, gaining that clarity and control.
Exactly. That knowledge itself can bring a sense of peace, and that's definitely something worth smiling about.
We really hope this deep dive has been helpful and makes you feel a bit more empowered in your financial journey.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Keep practicing your English, keep learning about these important concepts, and we'll talk to you next time on the deep dive.
Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.
Want to practice these phrases? Download your free PDF guide. Link in the description and pinned comment.
Like and subscribe for more English tips.